Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, HBO. Imagine losing 8 months of your life not because of a crime you committed, but because of the hat you wore to work. Kilar Abrao Garcia was snatched from a parking lot and thrown into an ICE detention cell, branded a violent MS-13 terrorist by a digital ghost. This is the terrifying reality of the gang database, a secret, unchecked hit list where a single clerical error becomes a life sentence without a trial. In March 2019, the morning air at a Home Depot in Maryland felt like any other. Kilar Abrao Garcia stood among a group of men, hoping for a day's labor and a modest paycheck. He was a man with no criminal record, both in the United States and his home country. But as a patrol car pulled up, his life was about to be dismantled by the stroke of a pen. To the officers approaching him, Garcia wasn't a worker. He was a data point waiting to be categorized. The officers didn't find drugs, weapons, or evidence of a conspiracy. Instead, they looked at his clothes. Garcia was wearing a Chicago Bulls hat and a hoodie featuring a graphic of money rolls covering the eyes of a president. In the eyes of the Maryland police, this wasn't just fashion, it was a confession. They claimed that the Bulls logo was a symbol of good standing within the MS-13 gang and that his hoodie was a clear indicator of Hispanic gang culture. Within minutes, Garcia was entered into GangNet, a regional database used to track the most dangerous criminals in the country. The logic was baffling. It implied that if a member fell behind on their gang dues, their Bulls hat privileges would somehow be revoked. It was a bureaucratic fantasy, but for Garcia, the consequences were devastatingly real. Based on nothing more than his outfit and the word of an officer, who, ironically, would be fired for misconduct just a week later, Garcia was labeled a public safety threat. This designation stripped him of his right to bond. While his family waited for him to come home, Garcia was being processed through the machinery of ICE detention. He spent nearly a year behind bars, a ghost in the system, fighting against an allegation he couldn't see and a list he didn't even know existed. Federal judges would later call the government's evidence fanciful, but the damage was already done. The database had spoken, and the system believed the screen over the man. Garcia's story isn't an isolated tragedy. It is the blueprint for how these databases function across America. They are opaque, proprietary lists managed by law enforcement with almost zero oversight from any other branch of government. From Boston to Los Angeles, police departments have created a points system for criminality. In these cities, you don't need to commit a crime to be labeled a gangster. You just need to be seen in the wrong place, with the wrong people, or in the wrong photograph. The criteria for inclusion are so broad, they border on the ridiculous. In some jurisdictions, simply being the victim of gang violence can earn you enough points to be put on the list yourself. In others, self-admission is used as a catch-all, where a teenager posting "Happy Birthday Gang" on Instagram is treated with the same severity as a confession to a felony. It is a digital dragnet designed to catch everyone, regardless of whether they've actually done anything wrong. As these lists grew, they became a tool for more than just surveillance. They became a weapon for deportation and enhanced sentencing. But as we look closer at the names appearing on these monitors, we find people who couldn't be further from the thugs the police claim to be hunting. In fact, one of the most famous names on California's list wasn't a criminal at all. He was a Grammy-winning artist who had spent his life trying to stop the violence. To understand how a person becomes a verified gang member without ever being arrested, you have to look at the cold, hard math used by departments like the Boston Police. They don't rely on convictions. They rely on a point system. It's a gamified version of law enforcement where your social life is tallied up until you hit a magic number. In Boston, if you're seen in a group photo with a suspected gang member, that's 2 points. If you're caught wearing a specific brand or gang paraphernalia, that's 4 points. Reach 10 points, and congratulations. You are now officially a gang member in the eyes of the state. The logic behind these points is as flimsy as a house of cards. Being in a photo with someone doesn't mean you're part of a criminal conspiracy. If that were the case, half of Hollywood would be considered part of a Kevin Spacey gang. But for a young man in a marginalized neighborhood, a single Instagram post from a backyard barbecue can be the evidence that ruins his future. The system doesn't account for family ties, childhood friendships, or simply living in a small, tight-knit community where you don't always get to choose who stands next to you at the corner store. Then there is the issue of known gang locations. In many cities, police have designated entire public housing complexes as gang territory. This creates a catch-22 for the residents. By simply walking out of your front door to get the mail or wait for the bus, you are technically associating with a gang location. You are earning points just for existing in your own neighborhood. It's a geographic trap that ensures the database stays populated with the names of people who have nowhere else to go. Even the concept of gang colors has devolved into a parody of itself. There was a time when red and blue meant something specific on the streets, but as the NYPD's own records show, the list of suspicious colors has expanded to include almost everything in the visible spectrum. Black, gold, yellow, purple, green, white, brown, khaki, gray, orange, and even lime green are now flagged as potential gang signifiers. It's no longer a vetted list of criminal symbols. It's the inventory of a Gap Factory outlet. When the criteria are this broad, the police aren't just looking for criminals. They are looking for excuses. If you can be labeled a threat for wearing a khaki shirt or standing in your own courtyard, then the database isn't a tool for safety. It's a tool for social control. It allows the state to keep a permanent eye on specific populations, waiting for a minor slip-up to trigger a major consequence. But as absurd as the clothing lists are, they pale in comparison to how the police interpret your confessions on social media. One of the most insidious ways a person ends up on a gang database is through what the police call self-admission. On the surface, this sounds straightforward. The idea that a person would openly tell an officer, "Yes, I am a member of a criminal organization." But in reality, this almost never happens. People don't volunteer that information to a patrol officer unless they've had a serious lapse in judgment. Instead, self-admission has become a digital translation exercise where the police act as the ultimate interpreters of your online life. In the digital age, a single caption can be your undoing. Take the case of a teenager who posted a photo with a childhood friend and captioned it, "Happy birthday, gang." To any normal person, gang is just slang for a group of friends, a squad, a family. But to a detective scouring social media for intel, that word is a formal confession of membership. Suddenly, a birthday wish is logged as a verification of gang status. If the bar is set that low, then any graduation photo captioned "killed it" could theoretically be used to link a student to a homicide. This digital profiling isn't applied equally across the board. The demographics of these databases reveal a staggering racial bias that is impossible to ignore. In Washington, D.C., a city with a diverse population, the gang database once held nearly 2,000 names. Out of those 2,000 individuals, exactly one person was white. It is a statistic so skewed it borders on the surreal. There are more white people in the cast of Hamilton than there were in the DC gang database. This isn't just about crime, it's about who the system chooses to fear. The net is cast so wide that even those working to save their communities are being dragged into the depths of the database. When police pull someone over in South Central Los Angeles and ask them to lift their shirts to check for tattoos, they aren't looking for evidence of a robbery. They are looking for a reason to categorize. It doesn't matter if the tattoo is a tribute to a lost loved one or, in the case of some celebrities, just a strange fascination with sharks. In the wrong neighborhood, Inc. is an indictment. The irony of this system reached a breaking point when California's database flagged a man who was the literal voice of one of the most famous anti-gang anthems in history. He wasn't a criminal, he was an interventionist. A man who dedicated his life to pulling kids away from the very lifestyle he was being accused of leading. His story proves that once you are in the system's crosshairs, your actual character and your contributions to society mean nothing compared to the label the database gives you. If there was ever a person who symbolized the tragic irony of the gang database system, it is Larry Sanders. To the world, he is better known as LV, the soulful powerhouse whose vocals defined the 1995 Grammy-winning hit Gangsta's Paradise. The song itself was a haunting critique of the cycle of violence, a plea for a better path that resonated across the globe. But back in South Central Los Angeles, despite his fame and his clear commitment to peace, Larry was just another man the police decided belonged in a file. Larry wasn't just a singer. He was a community pillar who worked in gang intervention. He spent his days in the trenches, talking kids out of the life and trying to bridge the gap between street crews and safety. He understood the nuances of the neighborhood because he lived them. Yet, while sitting in a public park, a place the police had arbitrarily labeled a known gang location, Larry was approached by officers who weren't interested in his resume or his music. They saw a black man in a specific area, and that was enough to start the clock on a validation. The interaction was a textbook example of how the net is cast. The officers claimed they were responding to calls about loud drinking, though Larry pointed out there wasn't a bottle in sight. They demanded IDs and told the men to lift their shirts to reveal any tattoos. Within a week, a letter arrived in Larry's mail. It wasn't a fan letter or a royalty check. It was a formal notification from the state of California informing him that he had been officially designated as a gang member. The man who sang about the blindness of hurting one another was now legally branded by the very system he was trying to improve. The absurdity of this placement cannot be overstated. Gangsta's Paradise was famous for being a clean rap song. Coolio had stripped all the profanity from the lyrics just to get Stevie Wonder to clear the sample. It was a message of redemption. But the database doesn't care about redemption, and it certainly doesn't care about context. To the software, Larry was just another entry. This wasn't an error of identity, it was a fundamental failure of the criteria. If a man whose life's work is preventing gang violence can be labeled a gangster, then the label itself has lost all meaning. This case blew the lid off the accuracy of these lists. When critics began to point out that music royalty was being tracked as a street soldier, the departments involved began to scramble. It turns out that when you actually look at the names on these lists, the numbers begin to shrink almost instantly. Once the public starts asking questions, verified threats suddenly vanish into thin air. But while Larry had the platform to speak out, thousands of others are trapped in these files for reasons that have nothing to do with crime and everything to do with politics. In the sweltering heat of October 2020, the streets of downtown Phoenix became the stage for a new kind of database abuse. During the height of the Black Lives Matter protests, a group of 17 individuals marched through the city carrying umbrellas to shield themselves from the sun and police pepper spray. They wore black clothing, the unofficial uniform of dissent, and chanted slogans against police brutality. They weren't a coordinated criminal organization. They were a group of strangers and activists joined by a common cause. But the Phoenix Police Department didn't see a protest. They saw an opportunity to test the limits of Arizona's broad gang laws. They arrested the group and, in a move that shocked legal experts across the country, charged them as members of a criminal street gang they invented on the spot, AAB. The criteria for this designation were laughably thin. According to a police sergeant who testified before a grand jury, the group qualified as a gang because they carried umbrellas, wore black, and used specific chants. The sergeant went even further, claiming under oath that this group of umbrella-carrying protesters was more dangerous than the Bloods, the Crips, or the Hells Angels. It was a staggering exaggeration, framed to justify the use of extreme surveillance and sentencing enhancements. They even swept up a man who wasn't even part of the protest. He was just a bystander who had stopped to take photos. In the eyes of the department, his camera was just as much a gang tool as an umbrella. This case revealed the dark potential of these databases to be used as a weapon for political retaliation. By labeling protesters as gang members, the state can bypass traditional civil liberties, imposing higher bail and harsher conditions of confinement. It transforms a First Amendment activity into a racketeering charge. While the State Department of Public Safety eventually declined to add these individuals to the permanent database, the attempt itself sent a chilling message. If you annoy the police, they have the power to redefine who you are. The Phoenix incident proved that the gang label is often a placeholder for a person we don't like. Whether it's a singer in a park or a student with a backpack, the database is a flexible tool that can be stretched to fit any narrative the authorities want to tell. But once that label is stuck to your name, the process of peeling it off is a bureaucratic nightmare that can take years if it happens at all. And for those stuck in the system, the real danger isn't just being on a list. It's what happens the next time a patrol car pulls them over. Once the system decides you belong on a list, that label becomes a digital ghost that haunts every future interaction you have with authority. For the vast majority of people on these databases, there is no notification letter, no day in court, and no clear way to appeal. Most people only discover their status by accident, usually during the most vulnerable moment possible, a routine traffic stop. This is exactly what happened to 32-year-old Victor Dempsey, a man who had spent over a decade rebuilding his life after a single mistake in his youth. Victor had served time at 17 for an attempted robbery, a chapter he had long since closed. He had a job, a family, and a clean record for more than 10 years. But the NYPD's database doesn't believe in expiration dates. During a simple stop for a traffic infraction, Victor noticed something chilling on the officer's laptop screen. Peeking over, as any curious citizen might, he saw his own mugshot next to a bold, terrifying label. Security risk. Despite being a law-abiding citizen for over a decade, the system still saw him as a threat to be detained in a squad car. This lack of transparency is the backbone of the database's power. In almost every state except California, the police are under no obligation to tell you that you've been flagged. You could be applying for a job, seeking a professional license, or trying to rent an apartment, all while a secret file identifies you as a member of a criminal organization. It is a form of shadow sentencing that exists outside the reach of the Constitution. Even when departments are legally required to purge old names every 5 years, audits repeatedly show that these lists are bloated with thousands of entries that should have been deleted long ago. The consequences of this permanent stain extend far beyond a tense traffic stop. If you are arrested for even a minor offense while on the database, the legal machinery shifts into high gear. Prosecutors can use your database status to argue for higher bail, making it impossible for you to return home to your family or job while awaiting trial. In states like California, a gang enhancement charge can turn a simple 2-year sentence for a petty crime into 15 years behind bars. It is a leverage tool designed to force people into plea deals, regardless of their actual guilt. As Victor Dempsey learned, you can change your life, your habits, and your community, but you cannot change the mind of a computer that has been told you are dangerous. This digital profiling creates a permanent underclass of citizens who are perpetually one random stop away from disaster. But while the impact on citizens is devastating, the stakes are even higher for those without the protection of citizenship. For them, a mistake on a police monitor doesn't just mean a longer sentence, it means a one-way ticket out of the country. In the mid-2010s, a wave of genuine violence associated with MS-13 hit Long Island, New York. It was a tragedy that demanded a serious response, but what followed was a descent into a paranoia that targeted children based on the most mundane details of their lives. Schools were transformed from places of learning into hubs of surveillance. Teachers and school resource officers were given training that was so vaguely defined it turned every Salvadoran or Honduran student into a potential suspect. The guidance provided to school administrators was maddeningly imprecise. They were told to look for identifiers like Chicago Bulls caps, skinny jeans, polo shirts, or even drawings of devil horns. One teacher recalled a security guard flagging a group of students for wearing the Salvadoran flag, a suspicious act that turned out to be nothing more than the kids celebrating their country's Independence Day. Without that teacher's intervention, those students might have ended up in a file. Unfortunately, a teenager named Alex wasn't so lucky. Alex was a Honduran immigrant who liked to doodle and wear his favorite shoes. To a school resource officer, however, his blue sneakers weren't just footwear. They were the official color of MS-13. When they looked at his backpack and saw the numbers 504 scribbled on it, they didn't see the international calling code for Honduras. They saw a gang cipher. When they found a drawing of a devil with horns in his notebook, they didn't see the school's own mascot. They saw a satanic gang symbol. These three innocent details were enough to label Alex a violent gang member. The process that followed was swift and heartless. Alex was added to the gang database, and shortly after, ICE agents arrived at his front door. They didn't need a warrant for a specific crime. They only needed the intelligence provided by the school. Alex was arrested, detained, and eventually deported back to a country he had fled for safety. When the local police commissioner was asked why they were using immigration tools instead of criminal charges, his answer was a chilling admission of the system's true intent. The commissioner admitted that while being a gang member isn't a crime, and the intelligence they had might not indicate any actual illegal activity, they used the database to label people as threats so they could be removed from the country. It was an end run around the justice system. If the police can't find a crime to arrest you for, they simply change the rules and use your status to get rid of you. This preemptive policing assumes that the list is always right, even when it's based on blue sneakers and school mascots. If the goal of these databases is to stop violence, the evidence suggests they are failing spectacularly. When you cast a net so wide that it catches singers, protesters, and students doodling their school mascot, you don't create safety, you create noise. Detectives become overwhelmed with thousands of leads that are actually just teenagers in the wrong zip code. This obsession with labels distracts from the actual police work that solves crimes, investigating specific acts of violence, following physical evidence, and focusing on the small number of individuals truly driving conflict in a community. The argument for keeping these lists often boils down to a single fear. How will we know who the bad guys are without them? But the answer is already in the police handbook. Dangerous groups and offenders can be tracked through traditional intelligence methods that don't involve secret permanent hit lists. In fact, when cities like Chicago and Portland finally scrapped their gang databases following years of criticism, the sky didn't fall. Crime didn't surge. Instead, resources were freed up to focus on actual criminal activity rather than policing fashion choices and social media captions. True safety doesn't come from a computer monitor in a precinct. It comes from the community itself. While the police are busy checking tattoos, community violence intervention workers are doing the heavy lifting. These are individuals who have the credibility to walk into spaces where police are not welcome. They mediate disputes before shots are fired, mentor at-risk youth, and provide a bridge to jobs and education. They treat the root causes of the gang phenomenon, poverty, isolation, and a lack of opportunity, rather than just slapping a label on the symptoms. We are at a crossroads in how we define justice in America. We can continue to rely on opaque algorithms and biased point systems that ruin lives by mistake, or we can demand a paradigm shift. These databases are built on the assumption that certain people are inherently dangerous because of where they live or what they wear. It is a philosophy of pre-crime that has no place in a free society. Until we dismantle these lists, we are essentially spending our lives living in a system that is blind to the human beings behind the data points. The human cost of these digital lists is written in the lives of people like Kilar Abrao Garcia, who regained his freedom but can never get back those 8 months in a cell. It's written in the frustration of Larry Sanders, a music legend who had to fight his own state just to prove he wasn't a criminal. And it's written in the empty seats of classrooms where students like Alex once sat before they were deported over the color of their shoes. These aren't just errors. They are the intended output of a system designed to categorize first and ask questions later. The hard truth is that gang databases serve as a get-out-of-jail-free card for due process. They allow the state to bypass the presumption of innocence by labeling someone a risk before they've ever seen a courtroom. If we want to truly address the violence in our streets, we must stop pretending that a secret list of names is a substitute for real investment in our communities. We cannot police our way out of social problems using broken software and biased data. Justice isn't a spreadsheet, and safety isn't a secret file. It's time we pull back the curtain on these databases and hold the people who manage them accountable. If a list is so inaccurate that it treats a Grammy-winning peace advocate as a threat, then that list isn't a tool. It's a liability. We owe it to the Kelars and the Larrys of the world to demand a system that sees people for who they actually are, not for the points a police officer decides to give them. If this story opened your eyes to the hidden systems that shape our world, hit the like button and subscribe to stay informed on the stories the headlines often miss. What do you think? Should gang databases be abolished entirely, or can they be fixed with better oversight? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear your perspective on where the line should be drawn between safety and surveillance.